Hello, fellow people on the internet. Welcome to this week's episode of Pop Culture Therapy. I'm Advent Nebula.
And I am Cruellica Kain. I love your saying of fellow people on the internet. Like we're non-existent and we're just replicants.
Well, who knows? After our last episode, maybe.
So we are back with our year or month of review of the past decade, because I don't know what we are in, since it was kind of weird 2 weeks ago. Yeah, about 2 weeks ago. We were in
2019,
which was the previous year, the previous month, and the previous decade. So you don't have this happen very often, except once in every 10 years.
Yeah, and we have the census mailing out our stuff here soon.
I know, so avoid it if you can. Make them have to work for it.
That's just evil.
I do it every time. I've been through multiple of these. So, as we had done our best or most favorite movies of the decade in our last podcast, today we're going to be talking about television. And we thought we'd kind of first start with our American, for the most part, television series. And then we would look at our international friends of our favorite anime. Mm-hmm. So we'll go with, and we're not going to list, at least for the television series, in their order. We're only going to go with the top 5. One thing I'll preface is that there's a lot of television out there. And it's hard to always keep up and watch any of them. So the one thing that we made as a rule is that when we're listing anything on our list for the television series, is we have committed to either watching full series or full season, or enough where we can actually comment if it's truly something we enjoy.
Exactly, and with that, I'm going to go into probably the only comedy series of the last decade I really got into, and you're going to give me crap for it because you went to Portland earlier last year.
Oh, I love it, and it's on my list too, so it's easier.
Yeah, Portlandia is just sketch comedy at its finest.
Portlandia, so the main characters are Fred Armisen, who is from Saturday Night Live. He was mainly big in like the late 90s, early 2000s. He still appears now and then because he has a really great relationship with Lorne Michaels. And his counterpart in the series, her name is Emily Brownson or Brownstein.
I think it's Bronson is actually how you pronounce it.
Probably. I'm terrible with names of any sort. But they do such a good job because this particular skit, which ran for 8 seasons, it actually just ended on the International Film Network, or IFC. International Film Channel.
Or Independent Film Channel, as it once was called.
But it's so funny, and they all play different characters. It's not like a continuous story.
It's little sketches about certain sets of characters that they've created, and they film it in Portland as well to give it the authenticity, because this series is all about the ridiculousness of how Portland's trapped in a time capsule, which it actually kind of is. So myself and Kaiji Okami went to KomoriCon, which is located in Portland, which is a great convention. If you haven't seen our videos or looked at my podcast or anything not my podcast, my blog post. But it was a great convention, and every time I met someone in Portland, they're like, "What do you know about Portland?" And I would say, I watched the show Portlandia, because the first time I said it, I thought somebody was going to be like, "No, it's nothing like this city. It's terrible. It's an insult." I was expecting vehementness. And the first person I met, who was a security guard who lived in Portland all his life, he was like, "Yeah, that's about accurate." And so I went with this running joke the entire time. Every time somebody was like, "Where are you from?" And I say, "Denver." And they're like, "What do you know about Portland?" I say, "Portlandia." And every single time, and I said this probably about 30 or more people, every single person of all ages, all demographics, all lifestyles, all said it was accurate. And it made me scared for humanity if there was actually a television show on that was accurate to what the perceptions of a particular culture were like.
It's 90s hipster box just trapped there, and I've been to Portland several times, and I love the city. I just can't afford to live there.
Oh, no. But Fred and Emily do a great job of doing their different shticks, doing their different skits. My favorite is personally when they're doing their feminist shop, because, oh my God, even Emily, they ride deep into, one, the ridiculousness of some feminists, and two, how they handle different situations. And they also bring a lot of funny side actors in, like you have Steve Buscemi in one, you've had
David Cross every once in a while.
David Cross, who's wrote some of the episodes, you'll have Jeff Goldblum, everyone.
I mean, they've really got the who's who. Tina Fey's appeared in a couple of the episodes over the 8-year run. It's basically anybody that they are friends with that they can get to come up to Portland to film a skit or something, or a few skits, and just roll with it and have fun. And the nice thing about the show is you can tell a lot of it is improv, and if there's a script, it's just a guideline on what to say, and then just improv from there.
Oh yeah, no, you can definitely feel that, and which makes sense because both are actually improv actors. So to have this non-consistent, I think there's only one time where you actually had something happen in a previous season reoccur again, but other than that, you could watch any episode and not be lost.
Yeah, it's like a non-committed version of Curb Your Enthusiasm, which for an improv show has overarching stories, where this one is just improv for the sake of improv.
Absolutely. So in looking at his list compared to mine, so I figure we'll get this two similar ones out of the way first. So one thing that Avent and I both have on our list is Legendary Defenders Voltron.
Yeah. For rebooting a series that was Americanized from its Japanese counterpart in the 80s and then bringing it into the modern day, they did a phenomenal job over its 8-season run.
They did, and the other thing I really liked about it is if you have not seen the original Go Line, which is the original Japanese version of the American adaptation Voltron, I would definitely watch both versions if you ever get a chance. The problem with Voltron back in the 80s, which admittedly makes me feel old because I watched it when it aired, is the fact that it was hokey, it was cheesy. You expected that because that was kind of the niche that some of those cartoons were in.
Especially when you only had about 6 people doing all the voices.
I was going to say, you had, I think the same voice actor for Pidge was the same voice actor for Keith, and so on and so forth. I'm actually surprised Laura had a female voice actress. But, so it's not like, some people could say, oh, it's so easy to do a remake of it because it's not like there was a lot there. Voltron had a very firm place in my heart, Kaiju's heart, Advin's heart.
And basically anybody that grew up in that 80s, early 90s time frame, this was a show they connected with.
Oh, absolutely. It had so much more. Yes, we had Transformers and all of those, but Voltron at that time was so pivotal and so great. And when you get the new version, and for me, the one thing that really stood out for the remake is the fact that they used some of the Japanese names or adapted, like Shiro. So all the characters had Japanese names and Japanese counterpart, and that were changed to Keith, Pidge, Hunk, all of that. Well, the one character, Sven, his Japanese name was Shirogane, or Shirogane, depending on how you did it. And when they kept Shiro, instead of turning into Sven, and then they kept Shiro alive,
and just had the overarching story through the entire series with him.
Oh, absolutely. The long-standing story, the development, the relationships, the adjustments because of Pidge, when you learn more about that particular character, when you learn about Shiro, when you learn about Keith's backstory, or Lance, or Hunk. There's so much.
And some of the best episodes are some standalones with either Pidge or Allura. And the way they just... Because if anybody who knows the 80s show, Allura was kind of just the female eye candy.
She was.
This show really developed her and made it so she was probably the most fleshed out outside of Shiro for the entire series run.
Absolutely. And all that they did with the particular series, in every single one of the episodes, yes, you had some of your duds, but overall, everything that you had in this adaptation of Voltron, and we've had a few adaptations, this is not the only of them, and many of the other ones were so bad. But this one, I had a lot of hesitancy on. And when the first season ended, all I asked Netflix and DreamWorks is, when will I get more?
Yeah, DreamWorks knocked this one out of the park. And if I have to say there's one standout episode, it's when Pidge is in that dimension with 3 other versions of himself communicating to get out.
Mm-hmm. I love, one of my favorite episodes is when they're on it's actually one of the later seasons, when they're on that one planet where Shiro is in, like, the wrestling match for arm wrestling.
Oh, God.
And you have all the guys trying to be super manly, and then you have Pidge with her brother. And it's hard because Pidge originally was a boy. Pidge in this series is a girl. But to keep up the mystique of the character, is represented as a boy. Nobody knows outside of Shiro and a couple other people.
And the rest don't even find out till, well, towards the end
of the first season.
Yeah.
Which was hilarious. Actually, no. Everybody else knew except for Lance.
Yeah.
And it was so funny because even Allura, who had not really been alone with Pidge, didn't know that Pidge was... It knew that Pidge was a girl. And when Lance finds out, he, like, flips. And I really like the voice actress that they have for her. Bex is a great actor. They do a fantastic job. The reason I say they for Bex is because they are... Is it pansexual?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, and they don't identify as either gender, which is a little... It's not difficult to wrap my head around. It's just I always forget, and I think because, especially myself being a little bit older, raised in that two-gender system, it's hard to remember sometimes and be cognizant when somebody wants to be they versus he or she. But they do a fantastic job, and all the other voice actors... Once again, Shiro's voice actor, if you ever get a chance to look on YouTube, you have the You're Welcome song.
They just have so much fun with everything they were doing while the show was running.
So now we're going to diverge from our two saying.
Yeah.
So what is your next favorite TV series of the decade?
I'm going for one that came out and really surprised, and it was early April this year, and... When I heard that David Tennant was going to be starring in an adaptation of Good Omens, I'm like, okay, if he's playing who I think he's going to be playing, this is going to be awesome. And then when I first saw the trailer at Christmas time in 2018, I'm like, okay, they are doing this book justice just from what I could tell for this trailer. And Good Omens just blew me away on just the comedy timing, the actual love they have for Neil Gaiman's work on this. Every single actor had fun with this, and the idea that God and the devil end up having a game and the Antichrist gets accidentally swapped into the wrong person and ends up a boy in the English countryside that got lost, and now they have to stop the apocalypse before he goes out of control. It is insanity. And then just the relationship that David Tennant has with I can never remember the actor's name that plays his friend, who's an angel from heaven. The dynamic they've had since Lucifer Fell is probably one of the best storylines that I never thought they could actually adapt from a book to TV, but they somehow mastered.
Well, and what's fascinating about me is I haven't watched it, but just all the love for it. One of the conventions we were at, 2 of the MCs decided to play the titular characters of Good Omens. And just from what I've seen from the trailers, or I know from how Neil Gaiman presents his characters, because I've read all of the Sandman stuff, is they really hearkened onto it, and it was just impressive how something that is only going to be a short series. Yeah. It's not going to be a long-standing, long-running series, does such a fantastic job.
Yeah, BBC and Amazon got together and funded I think almost every episode cost like $1.4 million to make each episode. So they balled out on their budget on this, but really, if you were going to make a true adaptation, this was the only way to go for it.
So one of my favorite series of this decade is actually a sequel series to something from the previous decade, Breaking Bad. I love Better Call Saul because it's an excellent prequel series to the world of Breaking Bad, since it takes place prior to. But I also enjoy it because it's a perfect fall from grace story. The main character, his name is Jimmy McGill, before he becomes Saul Goodman. You watch him trying to do everything legal and above board, and as you know, his character in Breaking Bad, and as they demonstrate here, he's not always been good at being on the right side of the law in general.
Yeah, there's a reason why in Breaking Bad he's a criminal lawyer.
Well, and it's funny because in the very first episode of the series, one of the people say to him, when he asks, well, why won't you have me as your attorney, she says specifically, you look like the type of person only criminals would have represent them. And you have that in the first episode, within like the first 25 minutes of the episode, that comment being said. And when you go back to when Aaron Paul's character says it, and you're like, wow. So we get to see not necessarily the beginning of it, because it takes a while for him to get to where he is, because we're coming up now to the 5th season, and we're seeing it again of where he gets to now being Saul Goodman.
Yeah, and Bob Odenkirk said season 6 is likely where you'll see his true evolution finally into Saul Goodman.
Well, and I know everybody asks, because I even asked it when we were in the first 3 seasons, of when are we going to have Waltz and all of that, and now Walt and Jesse, and now I'm like, while I want them, I don't need them.
Yeah, we've had Gus appear and a few of the others.
Oh, yes.
There, but you don't really need them to appear until what would probably be the final episode of Better Call Saul.
Exactly, when they walk into his office. So what is your next?
So my next one is probably the only really good thing to come out of the Star Wars franchise this entire decade, because the movie trilogy only had one really good one with the Force Awakens. Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker were just terrible, but Star Wars Rebels was like a callback to all the people like myself who knew the extended old universe from the books and ended up filling a niche there that you just didn't see. And I'm kind of curious to see what their continuation of Clone Wars this year with its final season, what they're going to do with that to tie it into Rebels now.
Well, exactly, because you have Ahsoka in this show. And it was fascinating because with Star Wars Rebels, you had Ahsoka, which mainly was from Clone Wars.
Yeah, you had Saw.
And then you had, who was from the
Rogue One.
Rogue One movie. And then you had Leia as a teenager, because she's about 15 here. So it's prior to, I think what was said is that it was about 5 years prior to
Rogue One.
To Rogue One, which is basically leading directly into the New Hope, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So I like Star Wars Rebels. It was hard not to put it on my list, and it should be for many reasons, but it's such a great show, I mean.
Yeah. And then for people like myself who loved Thrawn in the books, actually finally seeing an adaptation of Thrawn and them doing the character justice, because the Chiz are a race that feel no emotion. They're just straight strategic, straight to the point, made for a very good villain once he got him on screen.
Except for Kaiju, who always got frustrated with this character because Thrawn shows no inflection in his voice, no emotion in his voice. And you and Silverquill had to tell him at least 50 times that's because of the race he's in. Because Kaiju is used to all the other characters having such inflection, such attitude, such emotion. And especially when you have Space Aladdin.
Yeah. As we ended up calling Ezra.
I know.
But in a way, it does fit because of how his story of being a street rat thief was.
Oh, yeah, that's why we called him Space Aladdin. And then you had Freddie Prinze Jr.'s character.
Yep, and he also had his wife starring as one of the villains in the first 2 seasons.
Which made sense, because they work in each other's projects.
Yeah, but just seeing Kaiju not used to something in a Star Wars, and he's a Star Wars fan, was kind of funny as watching it.
Oh, yeah, no, it's absolutely hilarious. So, another one for me, I actually have to say, it's kind of another one of those series where you have brothers doing it together. And that's Stranger Things. Stranger Things, oh, I can't remember the 2 brothers who do the show because I'm terrible. But Stranger Things currently has 3 seasons. I know it's going on to its 4th.
And its 4th, they have said, will be its last season.
Which makes sense, because I think at this point they have told the story.
And it's gonna. What's really interesting, if anybody's seen the 3rd season, with the final season taking place in spring of 1989, if they know their history, know what's going to connect.
Well, and there's multiple reasons I love it. One, it's horror. Well-written horror, especially when you have... Especially the first season. The first season, while I like most of the second season, except for one episode, which I think is the same episode everyone hates, and then the 3rd season was good, the first season really brought everything together.
The first season is like bringing back that horror that Gremlins have a darker way during Christmas time.
Absolutely. Having the horror elements of really old school horror. It kind of made me feel like what Stephen King, which I know from... hearing from the directors, is the show is basically a love letter to everything Stephen King has ever done. It kind of reminds me of like Salem's Lot, Tommy Knockers, all of those isolated things in a small town. You have a boy going missing, and you have this whole series about like supernatural. You have the giant monster, and then you have every Easter egg for an 80s kid in the show. I have seen so much stuff that I'm like, oh yeah, that did come out in the 80s. I remember playing with that.
And then season 2, with it being a Halloween theme and taking place the same year Ghostbusters came out, and that kind of built into the theme of that season as well.
Oh, absolutely. All of these, and that's the one thing that you have to admit, is the directors, from what I've seen of pictures and what I'm assuming, they're around the same age as I am, maybe a few years older. But you can see how much they reflect on their love of the 80s. And their love of horror, their love of everything Stephen King. Everything together worked out so well. And then having that standout character, Millie Bobby Brown, playing 11, and making the decision herself as a preteen to shave off all of her hair during an age where girls are not terribly vain, but still puberty-ridden vanity of walking around and being bald for quite some time is fascinating.
Yeah, it really shows she's going to be one of those child actors that you know is not going to go crazy like a lot of them do.
No, I kind of feel she's going to be like Chloe...
Grace Martinez.
Yes, where she's going to be the one who is going to go by the beat of her own drum when it comes to being an actress or doing anything like that.
Yeah, because Chloe Grace Martinez, what she does nowadays is really what she chooses.
Oh, yeah. And then, what is your final of your television series?
So, kind of cheating in a way, because this one may also end up being, because it came out just a few weeks ago, but I've already binged through it twice. And... you know, when you're adapting a franchise that's been around since I want to say the early to mid 2000 decades when the first books came out, and they've been retranslated a few times until they've gotten them accurate, and then we've had the games come out. But The Witcher ended up doing what I was hoping they would do if they ever adapted it. And Henry Cavill ends up knocking out the personality of what book Geralt would be, as well as mixing in what a lot of more people today would be familiar with the game version of Geralt. Kind of hitting this even ground between the two so he can be extremely relatable, because Geralt in the start of the books, especially considering the first season takes place over a 50-year span, is kind of an asshole until he gets chilled out and later on as the books go on.
Well, he seemed to be an asshole in the game when I was watching it, so it makes sense.
And they've actually got, I think the casting's perfect. People can complain all they want because it's not how they felt it should be there. It's a high fantasy setting. It shouldn't really matter, even if it is Eastern European folklore that's getting adapted. As long as the acting is there, which it has shown, and the actor that they got, Joey Bastley, to play Dandelion / Jasker, he is probably the show stealer right now, just like he had been in the character had been in the games. And too bad, because of Henry Cavill's commitment to other projects, we don't have another season until 2021, but I think Netflix has their next real big hit with Stranger Things going down.
No, I think so. I think, and that's the one thing that Netflix has going for them. And I'm hoping it stays strong, because with the cost raising for streaming, you need enough to keep your audiences willing to pay the cost of entry. And with Disney Plus being out there, with HBO and Warner Brothers doing their own thing, it's going to be hard unless you have something to set yourself apart.
Especially now that Amazon's got the Lord of the Rings license from the actual family, which tells you that they really don't want Warner Brothers touching it anymore.
Which, I can understand that. While I don't necessarily agree, I can understand. So, and this is actually, admittedly, one of my favorites television series of the decade. It's one of those television series that I can watch over and over and over again. And it surprises me because, yes, I knew of the comic before the television series existed. I was not a huge fan of iZombie comics.
Yeah, the comics and the TV show are like night and day.
They are, but now that I've seen all of iZombie and I own the comics, so I've read some of them again, you can see how certain things work together. But iZombie, the TV show on Warner Brothers, was a huge risk in my opinion, because it's not like the superhero ones. It's not like Arrow and Flash. And
it's a detective comedy is what it basically boiled down to.
Well, exactly, because it's not even like Supernatural, because Supernatural at least has that stolen Constantine stuff. I basically call it Thief Constantine.
It is Thief Constantine. I'm sorry, Supernatural fans, but if you weren't familiar with Constantine, you should. And
if not for that show, Constantine would have gotten more love. But the problem was, every time somebody saw Constantine, they're like, oh, it's like Supernatural. Anytime I heard that comment, I wanted to scream, I wanted to pound my feet like a little child, and have like this whining tantrum, because I'm like, it's actually technically reverse.
Yeah, Grimm and Supernatural both stole from Constantine.
Oh, absolutely. There is no doubt that, yes, they've created their own stuff afterwards, but the entire thought process came from Constantine. And basically everything Constantine and his counterpart comics were made for. But with iZombie, you have a detective comedy where the main character eats brains on a daily basis, essentially. So you have horrible things happening, and then you have this particular character, Rose McIver, who's the main actress who plays the titular character, Liv Moore.
And which she's really nailed, hiding her New Zealand accent.
Oh, absolutely, because you cannot hear anything Aussie.
Kiwi, you mean.
Kiwi, I mean. You hear
100% Seattle American. And the reason I say Seattle American is because just like any other parts of the country, you have simple dialects that set you apart from the rest of the country. And she does such a good job with it. And what is so impressive is that she literally has to play a different person every episode because she's taking on the mannerisms, the attitude, the postulation, so to speak, of the person she's eating the brain from. So it could be a very masculine type character. It could be extremely feminine. It could be kooky. It could be...
The Richard Simmons style one and the Private Detective are probably two of the most classic ones.
Or she's also done where she's had to play a dominatrix. She's had to play a D&D type character. Oh, she's gone across the board.
The competitive gamer.
Oh, yes. And so you have her. Then you have the fellow doctor who finds out very quickly and just lets it go. Ravi. This actor... I've never seen the actor in anything else.
I don't know if he'll end up doing anything else because he's kind of set after this.
No, but he was such a good actor. And then you have the main detective that she works with. His name is Clive Babineau. But the actor, Malcolm Goodwin, does such a good job playing this very straight man to her kooky. And he has to run with it. And the best part of it is for the first 3 seasons, I think, he doesn't know she's a zombie. So he just thinks she's insane.
And then at the end of the season 3, when he actually finds out, and the zombies get exposed to the world, just ends up making the last 2 seasons a real ride to watch.
Oh, absolutely. No, it's 100% hilarious. And I think my favorite line is Clive is being asked, because he's a huge George R.R. Martin fan. And this was, I think, in 2nd or 3rd season. And he's asked, well, what do you think George R.R. Martin doing at this current time? And he just looks straight at the camera, all emotion. He's like, not writing. And it's just hilarious. Because every character... Every actor, every actress has their chance to shine. And that's the one thing I love about iZombie is it's never the same thing twice. And it's so ridiculous how they handle it. And it's not done in an unrealistic manner outside of zombies eating brains.
It's like what you'd see as a real crime show, but involving zombies.
Absolutely. It's basically take Castle, where you have the author, and switch it with the zombie.
Yeah, and it worked. It worked for its entire run.
Oh, absolutely. It's something I would definitely watch. It's, I know there's re-airing still on television, but all the entire series is on Netflix as well, currently.
Yeah, and it will be on Warner Brothers HBO app next, I think April.
Yeah, but I think it's on DVD and or Blu-ray as well,
yeah.
So.
It may just be DVD, because that's how Warner Brothers tends to roll with a lot of their shows.
It makes no sense. It's one of the reasons why we don't buy some of their shows is because they seem to
neglect Blu-ray because they rather you buy the digital versions of their shows.
Yeah, because that makes so much sense. All right, before we get on that soapbox, because apparently each podcast we're going to have the element where we're going to start to get on the soapbox and we have to gear ourselves back. Maybe we'll do soapboxes of the difficulty in the pop culture world of digital versus physical.
Yeah, that'll be coming later down the line.
If nothing else, maybe I'll just have Kaiji Okami sit in front of the microphone for an hour and tell you why. Because if you ever see him at a convention, ever see him anywhere, or even online, the one question I beg you never to ask him is, why do you hate digital media versus physical? Because you will get an hour or more diatribe, and sadly I've had to hear it many, many times, of why he hates digital media, and he feels that it's actually a short selling and an abuse of trying to make too much money off the consumer.
Alrighty.
But we'll move on to something happier.
Yes. This time, we'll start with you for your anime, since I started the movies.
Oh, anime, as you all know, and as you may be as well as us, is huge anime fans. Going into this last decade, I will admit, was a challenge because there were so many. But at the same time, there were so many I've rewatched over and over and over again from the previous decade that I actually thought came out this decade.
Where for me, it was a lot of, okay, how am I going to narrow this down? Especially considering most of these I own. And if they aren't out physical yet, the moment they are, I'm going to be snagging them out.
Well, absolutely. I'm the same way myself. I own so many of the series that are on this list, or I've seen them so many times that I just love them. So we're going to go with our least favorite of the top 10 to our favorite of the decade. So my top 10 pick would be something I never actually thought I would watch. Because I actually thought it was going to be pure fan service and just so dumb. Interview with Monster Girls. I like fan service in short spurts. And if it's too fan servicey where it gets rid of a plot in the sake of fan service, like how to summon a demon lord, I can't stick with it. It's one of the reasons why I love My Hime, which is an older series, but it has a great blend of fan service and not.
And the fan service doesn't hit you over the head at all.
Exactly. Which Interview with Monster Girls, even though they're high school students, it's anime. There's going to be fan service. But they do it in such a way that we're actually on the journey with two particular characters. The vampire girl, who is so neurotic, it's adorable. And then the gym teacher. Because the gym teacher becomes a pseudo-counselor for the three monsters that are in the school. A Durenheim, which is a basically the headless horseman, think of that. Best example would be Sleepy Hollow. You have the Snow Queen, or the Snow Girl, and then you have the vampire, and you have one of the teachers, I believe it's the English teacher.
She's a succubus.
Who's a succubus. A very terrible succubus, by the way, but a succubus nonetheless, because she has extremely high level of social anxiety. But you have these three characters, they're not bullied by any means. So it's not like Interview with Monster Girls is that they're bullied. Basically, the gym teacher, he's always had a fascination for monsters, mainly because in Japan, comparatively, he is a behemoth of a man. He looks like, even compared to his peers from an anime perspective, he is gigantic. He has to be well over 6 feet tall. And he's very built, very stocky. And so you have someone who looks like a monster in a way, trying to connect with these kids and give them a chance to feel that they're more than they are. And it's actually very heartwarming. And I couldn't stop watching it. It's only 13 episodes, but it was so well written, so well done, that you actually really enjoy it. And it kind of made you feel like, okay, no matter who you may be, man, woman, whatever you may enjoy in life, it's a great watch. And it's so simple, you can't hate it.
You go with wholesome for your starting. I go with dark and depressing.
I almost went to dark and depressing, and I had to take Promised Neverland off.
So my dark and depressing that starts this is From the New World.
Oh, Jesus.
Which, yes, you know how it's a story that you're following these characters from when they're about 9 to 11 years old all the way to adulthood. And they go through crap because it's the post-apocalypse. The humans that have survived all have psychic powers, but they got to keep their psychic powers under control, otherwise it can create more devastation on the planet than it already has. Because this is taking place about, 8,000 years later after the apocalyptic event when the psychic powers originated. But as the series progresses with the growth of these characters, you see the consequences of this, and then you also see the consequences of what mankind has done to itself to separate itself from the two sides of the coin. I cannot spoil the twist that you don't even get till the second to the last episode.
Oh, yeah.
But it's a ride. And it's a series you can't binge either. You kind of have to take it as each arc at a time. And the nice thing is, each arc is about 4 to 6 episodes. It's best to just watch it in those spurts, because you know you're going into another arc when the characters start aging again.
No, I think that works. And no, it's a great show. I had a hard time following it, but then again, I apparently have a hard time following Fate, so it kind of works in the same vein. I just have to give it another chance. But it seems, every time I've watched anything from it, I've loved it. It's just, it's hard.
It's a hard show to watch, and I loved it, but as I've recommended to people, if you're going to watch it, read what the episode counts for an arc are, watch it, digest it, then go back after a day or so, and then watch the next arc.
So my number 9 pick is kind of a new adaptation of a long-running cyberpunk series. It's been around probably since I think the 80s is when the manga came out for Ghost in the Shell.
89 for the manga is when it first appeared.
Because I know the first movie came out in 95, which I've loved Ghost in the Shell. I am not a huge cyberpunk or sci-fi fan, but I've always loved the element of crime drama, of a noir, of the horror elements, especially if you watch Standalone Complex, because you have the Laughing Man arc. Ghost in the Shell Arise is a completely brand new take. We have de-aged
all of the characters.
All the characters, but especially Kusanagi. But it's hard to say if you've truly de-aged her, because even in any other adaptation, we don't truly know how old Kusanagi was. We know that she was one of the first people
to go completely cyborg.
But they've always thrown us Easter eggs, but never actually clearly set out when Kusanagi went full cybernetic and went with only her mind being. And she has been both genders multiple times. So Ghost in the Shell Arise is another adaptation where you're building the team. You have Bato, you have Togasa, you have everyone there, but she is brand new to this world. And it's fascinating as a series. It's only really done in long-form OVAs.
And then the movie to cap off the rest of the story. Funny enough, because of the way it was presented, it flopped.
It did, but I enjoyed it immensely because, one, outside of the live-action film, we've had such great stand-ins for everything Ghost in the Shell. You have the original movie, then you have
its sequel.
The sequel, then you have the other one, then you have Standalone Complex, you have Solid State Society movie. So you've had so many great entries into this. And Ghost in the Shell Arise takes another great look because, one, you also have a brand new voice actress for Kusanagi.
Both sides, because you had Maya Sakamoto take over the role in Japan.
And for the American side especially, it's always been Elizabeth McGlynn since the second entry.
Yeah.
Because she did not play herself. The only person who's always played in every adaptation, except for this, is Richard Epcar.
And he was not in this, and they recasted everything.
Which is kind of funny because he mentioned that when they're doing their auditions for Bato, they said specifically to everyone, we want someone who sounds very similar to Richard Epcar. And Richard Epcar auditioned and still lost.
Yeah. And then what really was amazing is that they got McGlynn to actually come in and play the mentor character in this.
Yes.
And they did the same thing in the Japanese as well with the original actress playing that same role. So it was like, okay, if we're going to do this, we're going to kind of do it on both sides.
Well, exactly, because it's almost like passing off the reins onto the next thing. And that's the other thing I really liked about this particular series, especially for Kusanagi, is in every adaptation of Kusanagi, she is 100% confident, balls to the wall. She knows exactly what she's doing and gets it done. This, she's actually kind of lost, hesitant, and she makes a fair few of mistakes.
Yeah. And now, with later this year, the Ultraman Animation Studios doing the new standalone Complex series, which is a sequel to Solid State Society.
I'm hoping they don't do the same animation style.
They are.
I hate that animation style. Okay, before I get into new soapbox.
So, Gundam is a franchise that I enjoy a lot. Iron Blooded Orphans wouldn't make my list, though, of a top 10 or even a top 20 for the past decade, because the last 13 episodes of it were kind of a letdown. But we thankfully had a UC entry that just blew me away with Gundam Unicorn, just building off what had been kind of a left open question since Char's counterattack had come out. Because you never knew what became of the Zabi family, and then they introduced a few new elements that are still continuing on, and then some of those elements appeared in Turn A as question marks of what was going on. They appeared in Victory. But you actually got some answers now to what was going on in this time period, and then it continued on with the sequel film narrative, and then later this year we'll get Hathaway's Flash continuing on with this.
Well, I love Universal Century Gundam. While I love all the other Gundams, and actually Iron Blooded Orphans is going to be on my list, but that's later. Unicorn was a fantastic entry because, for me, Char's Counterattack was a weak film. Had a lot of elements that were necessary to progress the story, but I actually thought it was the weakest of the Universal Century. So when you had Char's Counterattack and you have Full Frontal, and you have everything else that's going into it, it was fascinating because it makes you question, okay, what's going on with these characters? Why do these characters have to constantly be in the same song and dance, essentially, especially with poor Minerva, who is now closer to adulthood, having to be stuck in the middle of it again?
Yeah, because she's just about to turn 18 and become the new ruler of the family.
Exactly, and you have to feel for that poor girl.
Yeah, and it's Stephanie Shea now playing the character. I think she just blew the role away in the English dub.
Oh, yeah, no. She's proven that she can do a lot of dynamic characters, so it's necessary to have somebody like that, especially within a Gundam universe.
Yeah, and with a franchise that's had the voice actors change so many times.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the downside about especially Universal Century Gundam, because all the other Gundams, because they're so much shorter and they don't have characters reoccurring over and over and over again, they've had great casts because they were able to make it work. For everything Universal Century,
it's thankfully they're going to stick with the cast now that they've got, basically, from going forward.
Which makes me happy, because by the time we get done with Universal Century, hopefully maybe we'll get a better adaptation of F91.
Well, and considering what Hathaway's Flash, the next movie, or what's going on is Crossbone, we'll see what goes with that.
Mm-hmm. So, my number 8 pick, I'm actually a little disappointed. I had to put this on my list because I love it still, even though it's technically been canceled, which may change, is Nanbaka. And the reason I have Nanbaka on my list as one of the best animes of the decade is it did something fun. Yes, we've had teams of 4 characters. Yes, we've had prison riots.
It was a parody of everything.
It was, exactly. It was a tongue-in-cheek, even the manga does this. It's a tongue-in-cheek parody of what makes anime, because you have 4 characters, which, if you think of Sayuki, if you think of, 4 male characters. There's so many animes out there that have those group of 4 male characters.
And they are the stereotypes of each one. The comedy relief, the stoic lead, the asshole.
And the fanboy.
Yeah.
Oh my god, you have the perfect fanboy of everything. And they're perfectly cast. And I think the reason why I love this so much more is it's not gotten the love it deserved in the United States. It was super popular in Japan. Everyone knows it in Japan. When it came to here in America, yes, it was dubbed. Yes, it was streamed on Funimation and Crunchyroll. But the series was out and completed for the first 2 seasons for 2 years before it actually got any kind of physical media release. And nobody talked about it. And it really surprised me, and it actually really disappointed me at the same time as to
why it happened. So it's kind of one of those series that I love, even though it doesn't have a complete ending at this moment in time, because of the fact that it's a lot of fun and it was very creative.
So, for my number 8 pick, I'm going into something that is one that you just don't get a lot of love, but when you think about it, it's not something you'd actually see in Japan because the mythology from the Celts is so vastly different. And the Ancient Magus Bride it's a beautiful love story, and it just pulls from every aspect of Celtic mythology accurately, which I was really floored by. And it's really a way to kind of show people what the Wiccan gods of the Celtic mythology are like.
Oh, absolutely. No, this was a beautifully done series, and it cared about the characters. Like, you could see that everyone involved in the original Japanese, I'm not saying the voice actors, but the script writers, the character designers, the directors,
and
the animators.
And you could tell that they actually communicated with the mangaka on this, the way it was adapted.
No, I loved this series. The only reason it's not on my list is because, one, so many good series, and two, it breaks my heart every time I get to the end of the anime. But the nice thing is, it's not written in such a point that they couldn't continue it, especially with the movie.
They end up picking the best point for somebody if they decided not to keep going, because where they stop it is at a point where, yeah, that's a very conclusive ending, even though there's more story that continues on from there.
Oh, absolutely. No, but the way it was written is perfect, in my opinion.
Because they only adapted the first 12 of the 23 volumes, so maybe we'll get the rest of it adapted at some point.
And you're a Celtic Wiccan, so it works so much more. It's kind of like Vinland Saga for Kaiju. Not that he's Wiccan, but it just speaks to him more.
And too bad that Amazon owns the rights and won't be dubbing it.
Which makes no sense.
Because they're releasing it on Blu-ray in February, the entire first season with no dub.
So my next series, I chose this because I actually have a really strange blend of my favorite animes. I go wholesome, I go hardcore, and I go comedy. So my next one is Space Dandy. The one anime series that does, just like Nanbaka, so not one, but one of the few series like Nanbaka, that does not have a consistent storyline. It is each one-off and a one-off and a one-off. And I love it because it's done by the creator of Cowboy Bebop. And if you know Cowboy Bebop, it's so serious and so just direct in its storytelling that it does not give you a moment to really breathe because you're still so involved in the story every which way. And then here, you have the same directness because you have fully realized characters, but it's done in such a comedic manner that you've had the characters die at least 4 times.
Yeah.
How do you still have a 26-episode series when they have died within the first 2 of the times within the first 5 episodes?
You get your answer, and it's kind of ridiculous when you do.
Oh, my God. And then you have the main villain, and I use quotations because it's basically a big masked-type ship that has a ball gag. And the main restaurant they hang out is called Boobies. So it is not supposed to be taken seriously by any means.
Yeah, it's off-the-wall comedy, and Seishiro Watanabe seems to do this. He'll do a show like Bebop, a show like Kids on the Slope, and then he'll do something like Space Dandy.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Makes no sense to me.
So, for my number 7... it's probably what would be Kaiju's in his top 3, I would say, for it.
Oh, yeah.
And when you take a new concept with superheroes, you're taking a gamble and a risk, but Tiger and Bunny really pulled it off with the corporatization of superheroes and sponsorships.
Oh, yes.
And it's not just that part of the aspect, though. It's every character is very relatable to their story arcs and what goes on, and then the fact you end up having a aging superhero who's causing the ratings to lower team up with a brand new star who's got his own motives going on at the same time, it ends up making for a real good buddy cop story.
Oh, I know. This is higher on my list, so I'll talk about it later, but I love Tiger and Bunny. It's such a fantastic series.
Yeah, for me, Barnaby is a really complex character.
Well, Barnaby is really what makes it stand out as a character.
Yeah.
And, fun fact, that's the first character Kaiji no Kami ever cosplay as.
Which tells you something about what he relates to.
Yes.
At least he didn't do Lunatic.
No, not without effort. We'll get into that later. Oh, God, that was a nightmare. All right, so my number 6... This is my second to last wholesome. And the reason why this is on my list is not because of all the hype. I did not care about the hype. Yuri on Ice is an excellent, kind of wholesome story about someone who is dealing with very difficult issues of anxiety, of self-love, which I think is probably the litmus to what really starts the series, and confidence in one's abilities. When I heard about Yuri on Ice, I had no interest because it was a sports anime. And truthfully, after watching Yuri on Ice, I actually have more appreciation and more willingness to watch sports animes because I found that there's dynamic stories outside of said sport, which back in the 90s and early 2000s, that was not the case.
Where the sports aspect only makes up about, I want to say, a third of the actual story.
Well, yes. It's like, yes, figure skating happens in almost every episode, but there's so much more to it. And I appreciate the story for what it is. Admittedly, yes, selfishly, the reason I got into it is because somebody told me, namely Advent, that was a yaoi, and I'm like, sure, I'm a fujoshi, I'll go for it. But I was very happy to watch it because there was so much more to the story than just being simply a sports anime or being simply a yaoi. It was really something that I've seen the series about 4 times already, and it's only been out for like 3 years because of the fact that it talks about characters in such a realistic manner that I have not seen in many animes.
Yeah, and even the Japanese director, she praised the English dub because she actually wrote the characters, because in figure skating, English is the only language spoken no matter what your nationality is.
Mm-hmm. Well, that makes sense because while technically the most popular language in the country is Chinese, because of the fact of Chinese having the largest population, the most widely known language in the world is technically English.
Yeah, and that's why in the International Olympic competition, almost everybody speaks English, and that's why it seems a little awkward when you're watching some of the show, especially when you have a few real-life characters actually portraying themselves in both languages.
Oh, yes. So what is your number 6?
My number 6, I'm not going to go over it very much because I've talked about it enough on here, but it's Fate Zero and Fate Unlimited Blade Works just together. You guys already know. I don't need to go over anymore.
Yes, every time he comes over, he plays the not stupid technically, but the silly Fate MOBO game.
You gotta farm, because it's the only way to actually get progress in the game.
So he loves Fate. If you didn't know it before, he loves Fate. Which is kind of funny because most people hate Fate in reality. So my number 5 is technically my last wholesome series, I promise you. But I have loved this series since the first anime came out, almost 20 years ago, which is Fruits Basket. So the first adaptation came out, and I fell in love with it because, one, it was the first non-action-y or horror or thriller anime that really got a DVD release in America. Because yes, you can say Sailor Moon is a girly anime, but it's still action.
This
it's still
is where
magical.
Funimation took a very big gamble when they brought this over.
Absolutely. They took a huge risk in releasing Fruits Basket, especially releasing it in 4 parts rather than just getting it in one long set series and being done with it. And they proved with Fruits Basket back in 2004, it came out in 2002, but America release was 2004. They proved to American companies, to Japanese companies, Japanese licensors, that everyone does like, to certain degrees, a wholesome series that does not really have action, but is about family. It's about love. It's about dealing with tragedy in a very weird way.
It is one of those series that does that.
And when the manga completed, which it finished at 23 volumes, you got to see the full complete story in manga, but with the way the anime was done, they were never going to do anything more with it because it didn't flop, but nobody wanted to do more with how the original anime was completed. And in the vein of Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, they took it upon themselves, and Funimation did the same, of saying, you know what, we're going to redo the series, and we're going to do the entirety of the manga. We will only keep 4 voice actors from the original, Toru, Kyo, Yuki, and Shigure.
Oh no, they kept 2 others.
Who else did they keep?
Kent Williams, actor, and
oh, yes.
Chris Sabat both came back as well.
So, very few characters. Oh, yeah, because Hatsuharu. Yes.
Oh yeah, so Justin Cook, so 7.
7 characters. So they only kept a few of the original voice actors, mainly because they've done so many projects since then.
And they're all still there.
They're all still there. So they have 7 voice actors, and everyone else is brand new.
And then on the Japanese side, only 1 came back, and everybody else was completely recast brand
Which is
new.
very common in Japanese side of things, which is a little disappointing, but everyone does a fantastic job, both new and old. Yes, some of the voice actors have matured, like the Jerry Jewell who does Kyo, Laura Bally who does Toru, and Eric Vale who does Yuki, and, oh god, who does Shigure?
Shigure, John Bilgemeyer.
John Bilgemeyer, which John Bilgemeyer, his voice has changed. But they don't try to replicate exactly how their voices were for the original anime. But they do it in a way where you can hear the changes, but you can still feel who they are as a core character. And the fact that even just for the first season alone, they have done so much and brought in so much that was from the original anime, or the original manga, I mean, was so beautiful. And I'm looking forward to everything that comes next.
Especially with it looking like a final episode count around 66 episodes.
Which makes sense compared to, like, Brotherhood, which was
64.
Yeah.
So, this is likely the only, well, it actually is the only isekai I have on there. It's the anti-isekai show.
Oh my god, the anti-isekai.
Yes. Konosuba.
Oh god!
Yes. When you have a series that is basically what would happen if people in real life in America had a D&D party and ended up going into a isekai universe trying to be together. You have the idiot thief that just grants his powers, who ended up dying in the most dumbest way possible. The useless goddess, who, yeah, Aqua is completely useless. The wizard who only knows one spell, and the paladin who's a sadomasochist.
I know, and I wish Crystal Edge Bloodborne would watch this series just to see that there are other versions of paladins out there.
Oh no, I made him sit down and watch the show with me.
Then why he doesn't acknowledge that there can be sadomasochistic paladins? Because I've played with people in D&D who are sadomasochistic paladins.
And the best part is you have a Lynch who, anytime she touches anybody, actually starts to dissolve.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
I have not watched Konosuba, but now I'm sold and I'm going to have to look for it.
Yeah, and Crunchyroll has done the dub for this, and They have an all-star cast on this as well. You have Christina V doing your paladin.
Oh, God.
You have Erica Mendez doing your wizard who knows only one spell.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
You have Faye Mata being the useless goddess Aqua. So you have basically half of the Diamond Unbreakable cast, and then you have half a Kill la Kill together in one dub cast.
You know, I haven't heard Kill la Kill from you as of yet. I'm waiting. So my number 4 pick is Gundam Iron-Blooded Orphans. Yes, the last 13 episodes did take a dip in certain regards, but there were still diamonds out there. The reason why I liked Iron-Blooded Orphans is it took something completely different from everything else that's been done for Gundam. Because even when you think of the teens that were doing Gundam for Gundam Wing, they weren't slaves. You've never had a slave colony who already had Gundams, who already had machines.
And on top of it, they're children.
Exactly. They're literally children because Mickey
is 15.
Yeah, and yes, that's about the same age as the guys from Wing. So much different between. It's almost night and day because Mickey, just like
it's kind of like he's the anti-Amuro when Amuro was 17 when he ended up.
Absolutely, he has elements that remind me of Setsuna from 00, because Setsuna was almost machine-like in his way, but Mickey does it so much more, and every character is very dynamic, very well done. The Gundam designs are actually so disgusting, but well put together, and that's the other thing that I like about it.
Well, not just that, you only have 4 Gundams in the show, everything else is just regular mobile suits.
Well, exactly, and even the mobile suits are not, they're so just simplistic and, like I said, disgusting. I don't mean disgusting as like, oh my god,
they're very primitive compared to the 4 mobile suits, because Mickey has Barbaros, the main mobile suit, and then you have the villains who have the other 3.
And the one thing I like about Barbaros as well is when you look at it, it's almost like the middle of its body is a ball bearing.
Yeah.
And
it's designed for melee combat.
Exactly. And that's another thing is, yes, you can have Gundam Wing, like literally Gundam Wing, where you have the wings. You can have so many of the Gundams, even Psycho Gundam. And this one just hands down really puts an element of, they don't have the finance, the skill. And then you have these kids who are really trying to get themselves out of hell. And they do so in such an interesting manner because it's not like they have anyone who can really help.
Yeah, and the one person they have that can help them, she gets stabbed in the back in the first 5 episodes.
I know, it's so bad. But no, Iron-Blooded Orphans is one of those shows I would definitely recommend. Even with its weak episodes, it really reminds you of why Gundam 1 doesn't have to be completely polished, as you saw with Gundam Seed and Seed Destiny.
Which may have been too polished, and that's why Destiny ended up being so bad.
Absolutely. And while Gundam 00 is fantastic, and that would have been on my list, I actually begged and pleaded with the gods to make it on our list, but it came out in 2009, because that's also by far one of my favorite non-UC series. And Iron-Blooded Orphans just kind of sunk its teeth into it to me and said, you know what, UC is great, but we need to have something different.
Yeah, for me, it's been the build fighter stuff that I actually found I enjoy more than Iron-Blooded Orphans. That's just because Iron-Blooded Orphans had this build-up that it was going to be great, but for me, it went out on a whimper in its last 13 episodes.
And I can appreciate that, but I still find it one of my personal favorites of the decade, because it tried to do something new, and success or fail, it definitely achieved its goal.
And the one thing is, it did end how I expected it was going to end.
Oh, yeah, no. And we won't spoil that. I would definitely watch it if you ever get a chance.
So, my number 4 is going into the Aniplex bin again. Kill la Kill.
Well, duh.
Yeah.
There's no surprise there.
Which, I need to get new box set that just came out now that's actually at a reasonable price. Thank you, Sony, for merging Funimation and Aniplex together, even if Aniplex is still on the pricier side. But nonetheless, this is a series that I took a gamble on because Trigger had just been formed from guys who just spun off from Gainax after Panty and Stocking, and actually had a disagreement with the Gainax guys, so they went, you know what? We're going to go off, do our own thing. And they blew it out of the park. Funding from Aniplex, I think, helped with this as well, but telling an original story that is as ridiculous as Living Clothing and telling a revenge tale at the same time, you ended up getting a series that ended up having you edge of your seat because it started out as kind of a tournament arc anime into a conspiracy anime by the end.
Well, and Kill la Kill, one of the reasons it wasn't on my list is I love it. I love it so. It would probably be my number 11. It's so out there, and the characters, once again, and I think going in the same vein of Gurren Lagann, the characters are so dynamic.
Yeah.
So well thought out. So in your face with everything. And that's what I love about Kill la Kill. Especially with the scissor swords. That's...
Yeah, and then the way the plot ends up throwing you for a loop after the 13th episode.
Well, and that's a great thing in a story like that, because when you get into the action stories, if it's on the same tempo the entire time, you lose so much as a fan.
You do, and then this one actually ended up keeping you invested by what it ended up doing in a very unique way. But, my God, Nudist Beach, just the most hilarious thing that you could ever think of.
I can never think of Nudist Beach as anything but Kill la Kill ever again. So, my number 3 pick is... I personally think of it as a detective noir with horror elements. Because along the lines of Ghost in the Shell, it makes you think...
We have the same number 3.
I think so. But taking along the lines of, what if somebody else was responsible for telling you if you're going to be a good or a bad person?
Yeah, we do have the same number 3.
So, Psychopaths. Not all of season 2. Mainly all of season 1.
Yeah, mainly all of season 1. Neither of us have watched season 3 yet because it's Amazon.
I know. But nevertheless, season 1...
And the movie.
And the movie. The nice thing about Psychopaths is even if you stuck with just season 1 and never watch anything else, it is a fully encompassed, complete story that you wouldn't have to continue unless you wanted to.
And then the movie is kind of that epilogue to kind of wrap the last questions up you had.
And the main character, I think, she is what sells it for me. Her name is Akane, and we are watching the series through her eyes. Of
being this just recent college graduate rookie thrown into a situation.
Well, exactly, because the Sybil system, which is the litmus for this series, tells you from basically almost birth.
It is, from the moment you are born.
If you're going to be a good or a bad person, if you are going to go into some realm of career, because in the first episode, she's talking to 2 of her friends, and they all have 3 different careers based on what Sybil told them they should do.
And Akane had such a high score, she could have gone anywhere, and she chose to be in the government's system that is probably the most controversial with actually being the Sybil system.
Absolutely. And she literally finds out what we talked about like in our last podcast with Ex Machina, the ghost in the machine. She finds out what Sybil really is, and
it's Geno Uebuchi's writing just... And we were watching Gaim at the same time we were watching this.
Oh, I know. Yeah, Geno Uebuchi, you can tell this was, his love letter to basically Philip K. Dick.
Yeah.
Because,
and William Gibson's writing as well. It even references it in the show, the 2 authors.
Yeah, he references both authors using the main villain, Makishima. But I think why this is one of my favorites is, and it's probably yours as well, but for me, I had never seen a series like this before. nothing anime-wise, and I've watched anime since the late 80s knowingly, has ever done any storytelling like this where you really are very involved in the story, very involved in the characters.
For me, it was the involvement, and Makishima is probably the most relatable villain I think we had the entire decade, because you actually saw his point of view on the corruption of the system.
Absolutely, because yes, he was a terrible, terrible person. There is no doubt in anyone's mind, but he was actually like the perfect exact opposite of Akane. So you have two characters that technically have fooled the Sybil system unknowingly.
And then you have the wild card in Kagura.
Exactly, and Kagura, well, he... so much there. But these two characters are perfect standing structures of opposites attracting, because they come at each other from so many different directions. And
then you had Kagura, who's basically Makishima on the other side of the law.
Basically Makishima, who's good.
Yeah.
And the Sybil system warranted him as bad.
Yeah.
Which makes no sense to me. But, once again, the perfect question from the series is, what do you do when technology is the one running your life?
Yeah. And that's the big question it ends up asking, because it's become so reliant on it. And America, at this point, because it's taking place in 2102, has basically thrown the rest of the world into a constant civil war.
Exactly, because Japan took it because America refused to.
Yeah.
America refused the Sybil system, obviously, because look at us. I think even in the real world, we
develop it and then refuse it.
Well, exactly, because it's the question of, does it take away your free will, or is it helping to mold it? Because some people flourish under that. That's why I think it's so fascinating.
So since our number 3 was the same, what's your number 2?
So my number 2 is actually Tiger and Bunny. Tiger and Bunny, I think, would be number 1 for Kaiji no Kami. Probably for the same reason it's number 2 for me. Because number 1, I have to say I'm super, super selfish on. But the reason why Tiger and Bunny is actually very similar to the reason why I like Psycho-Pass. I have never seen anything like this before. And just like Psycho-Pass, which I didn't mention before, but for this, it's written for adults. And as much as I've loved anime, and I will watch a ton of anime that feature teenagers and things like that, outside of Gundam, outside of Gantz, outside of a few series, the anime series are technically written for all ages, all audiences, or for a younger audience.
And this one is written for adults because it's facing real adult struggles and problems.
Absolutely. Like, you have the main character, who...
A single father trying to keep his fact that he's a superhero hidden from his daughter.
Well, because he wants to have a strong foundation for his daughter. His wife dies pretty young in his daughter's life, I think almost at childbirth, and he just has to learn how to struggle, and then he continuously loses his power, and you have to wonder, okay, what does this mean? How does this handle a life struggle?
You have Barnaby, who's living in his father's shadow, and then there's a lot of other stuff going on that we don't want to spoil.
Kotetsu. Okay, I had to remember his name. But yeah, Kotetsu. And he is, for me, he is my favorite character. Because he plays Wild Tiger, and he also has to teach Barnaby to be human.
Yeah.
Because Barnaby comes out as very egotistical, very brash, very... I have the world by its balls. I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm super strong. I'm super powerful. I'm super confident. I'm super rich. I'm basically Batman in a different world.
And then, well, I gotta say, usually the gay, actual blatant gay character in an anime is a joke character. Yes, this one's done as a joke as well, but at the same time, is one of the very serious characters and very well developed in a serious way.
Well, he is, and I think that's why I appreciate it, is because of the fact that every character is legitimate. You have every character playing real-world tropes while living in a world of superheroes. And the superheroes are, like you had mentioned earlier, are monetized.
Yeah.
If we're going to have vigilantes, let's make money off of it.
Let's turn it into a TV event every night.
Yes. And I think that is probably the best part of it, is that they understand what they're doing and they take it and run with it. And the other benefit I don't think we talked about is the fact that this takes place in America. The entire series takes place in New York.
Yeah, and it's like one of those futurized kind of the comic cities you would see, and then plastered with all of what we have as modern sponsorship, because it wasn't the Amazon logo wasn't Amazon.jp, it was Amazon.com on the actual.
And they had Pepsi Cola, they had Pizza Hut, they had
every company was an American company.
And it takes place in America. All the characters, even in the Japanese track, they don't speak English, obviously, but they have that American connotation, that American attitude that because even though the main character is a Japanese character, he's technically a Japanese American.
And then his daughter is a mixed race, which is brought up at one point.
Mm-hmm. And so you have so much playing around there, and it's so fascinating to watch it work. What is your number 2?
My number 2 is what happens when you actually take a science fiction idea of time travel, but make it to a point where it's 97% real science, and then 3% the pure science fiction of what it is. In Steins Gate, it's amazing because there's actual American science fiction authors that have read this visual novel and that have watched the anime and actually been blown away on how accurate the science is for a guy who has no science background writing a series like this. Because it bases everything on quantum theory. And time travel based on the quantum theory, and alternate timelines are actual alternate dimensions.
Oh, wow. No, that is actually fascinating.
And that, in the way the series goes and its build-up, it works really well. I had played the visual novel after I watched the anime and actually helped flesh out a lot more, because it ends up touching on the endings for all the characters throughout the game, but kind of rushing it, but kept the main, what's the canonical story together at the same time.
And I think that's important with a series like that, especially when you're dealing with time travel, is because you want to have something that's going to connect with your audience. And I know Future Diary kind of did elements like that, but I know Steins Gate was trying to go for more of the realistic route.
It is probably one of the most realistic science fiction shows out there. Yes, at times it's a little kooky, but when the main character is an egotistical 20-year-old self-made scientist that made a time machine with a microwave and a cell phone?
Wow,
yeah.
That sounds like Dr. Stone. No, I actually have been meaning to watch that series. I have started and stopped trying to watch that series so many times because I have ADD occasionally.
Yeah, and it's one of those shows because it's best watching the 13 episodes. Watch the first 13 episodes and binge the last 13 episodes.
No, I think that's fair. So my number 1, I know for a fact, is the same as your number 1, because we have talked about this. My number 1 anime of the decade is, and I think we talked about this in the movie, when you have a continuous series that goes over multiple arcs, or multiple, not movies for this, but multiple series.
And one that's been around for 25 years that just now got a proper adaptation.
Well, exactly, because the animes, Stardust Crusaders really started what kicked it off.
Yeah.
But JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. I think I've mentioned this before, and I won't go into too much detail.
I don't think either of us will go in much detail, but
I only started this series because Avent and Chrysalis Bloodborne would not stop talking about it. So I had no other choice but to figure out what they're doing so I can understand, and unfortunately it roped me in.
But for me, I've started reading the manga even with the bad translations of Diamond is Unbreakable and Golden Wind, because they just now with the Shonen Jump translations actually have accurate translations. But I've been reading it since 2009.
Well, and what fascinated me for JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is the series is a long-running series. Yes, the series has been around since the 80s. However, the animes really started coming out in 2012, which actually really surprised me.
It was the 20th anniversary project, too.
And so we have basically the first 5 parts have been fully completed in Japan and are almost completed in America, which really revolves around the Joestar family. I know we've done podcasts about it, so I'm not going to go into depth. But why it's the favorite for me is it's so... I know I've used this word so much, but I have to say it again. It's dynamic. Every character that this creator, Araki, has done for his characters and that has been translated properly into anime form is so well defined. It's so out there. And
they did a risk, too. Taking David Productions, which was a brand new studio coming in to start with this project as well, but now look at it with they've done with Fire Force.
Well, Fire Force is a fantastic series as well, and you can see the love. And I think that's my biggest thing, and this is where I'm going to say for JoJo's that really helps it, is a production studio, the animation studio. You can really tell a good anime series by how much love the production studio gives it.
They are capturing whatever style each part has had for its art style when they adapt these.
Yes, and if you watch the series and if you look at even the covers of the manga, each series, because that's how they break it, Series 1, Series 2, up to Series 5 right now, has a very different presentation. Like, you have the classical Middle European
one. It fits the North Star design of the first 3
season.
Actually, Stardust Crusaders had that kind of design still going well.
It did, but what I liked about when we got into Battle Tendencies is you saw the classical New York style, because it took place starting in 1920s New York, whereas when you got into Stardust Crusaders, yes, it still had that over expressed Fist of the North Star. It was 80s.
Yeah.
When you got into
Diamonds Unbreakable, you have the muted 90s look.
Exactly.
And now with Vento Arreo, you have that / Golden Wind, the early 2000s kind of gangsta look.
Yes, where everybody takes a different perception of the world. Because rock music, sadly, has been dying since the late 90s. So you see that because where rock music has been dying, rap, hip-hop has been thriving.
Yeah.
And you see that in its presentation when you go from Stardust Crusaders that has that more rock and rollish type feel to it, to when you get to Diamonds Unbreakable to Golden Wind, which has a more nouveau hip-hop-ish type
and which
trends.
will be really interesting when they eventually adapt Steel Ball Run, because that harkens back to the 1800s and has a very Old West 60s country style vibe to it.
So it's fascinating to watch, and that's why I personally enjoy and have to say it's one of my favorite series. How about you?
For me, it's the dynamic storytelling, the uniqueness of every character, and the fact each arc is so different from each other. And Araki knows how to write villains, even though they're overpowered. He never makes them truly invincible.
No, he always gives them a get out clause if needed.
Yeah. And the only time that he really did do something overpowered, he had to make the hero too overpowered. Which, if you've finished Golden Wind, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Well, and I think the other fascinating thing is it's also a legacy series, which Gundam Age tried in one series.
Gundam Age didn't work at all.
No, and I think having something like this, kind of what you had mentioned with From the New World, where you have this series where you have it taking place in different stages, it works if you give each stage time to breathe. And that's the one thing I like about JoJo's as well, is each series gives each characters the chance to be themselves.
Yeah, it does. And every main character, every villain, every Joe Bro feels extremely unique.
And every side character is developed. My God, I haven't watched a series where side characters have actually gotten their full storylines in years. Even actual American television doesn't do that anymore.
Yeah, you'll have a side character maybe only in 1 or 2 episodes, but they have their entire story resolved on who they are.
And that doesn't happen in JoJo's. You have side characters that their story is constantly being subtly weaved into the main narrative. Like in Golden Wind, one of the characters dies, and you still are dealing with their fallout of their story throughout.
Yeah, and then with Stardust Crusaders, you have the characters that keep coming back in after you think they're done.
Oh yes, no, that's the reason why this series as a whole is well worth a watch. I know there's so many long running series,
but the nice thing is with this one, you can look at it because you don't have to go in knowing the backstories unless you're going to be fully committed.
Yes.
You can pick a certain arc that's going to appeal to you and then just watch that. And then if you want to continue on, you can deviate into the others and dive deeper.
Yeah, the world is not going to end if you watch part 3 alone, which is Stardust Crusaders, and that's it. You can watch one part of it and truly enjoy it.
Well, with that, we're going to call it a good. And with our next episode, we continue on our best. We're going to talk about video games. And then we're going to end this month not talking about best, but going into a topic that's still going to be fresh in a lot of people's minds, even though the movie's probably out of theaters by now. But we have to do a redux on the Star Wars fandom because it's time again to set in the therapy chair, Star Wars people.
And also, I know we have to eat crow and listen to a little bit of I Told You So while we're doing it. So we will be back soon with our next look back in the past decade of video games. So until then, bye.